He ignored the 12th of her frantic calls, letting it go to his automated assistant. While 7 months pregnant, a blinding pain ripped through her body, and she saw the first terrifying trace of blood. Her hand trembled as she pressed it against her abdomen. A strangled cry caught in her throat as the new life she had so carefully nurtured was suddenly at risk. He saw every single notification. He glanced at the text. He watched the words, "Hospital emergency, the baby," flash across his smartwatch.
Yeah. Did you confess to the police?
Then he silenced the device, leaned closer to his chief strategy officer, and motioned for the waiter to open another bottle of vintage wine. The last name she thought before the world went black was his, but Julian was hours away at an exclusive tech retreat in Big Sur. What followed is a story of calculated retribution, because the pregnant wife he abandoned wasn't just some socialite. She was a Pulitzer-nominated investigative journalist, and her godfather was a man who'd spent his legendary career as the top white-collar defense attorney in the country. When she pieced together the full picture of Julian's deceit, his affair, and the monumental fraud that was propping up his entire tech company, she didn't fall apart. She didn't plead. She began to build her prosecution. This is the story of how a betrayed wife and her formidable godfather systematically took apart the empire of every single person who threatened her child. And I assure you, by the time we are done, you will be on your feet cheering. Stick around for the conclusion. The justice is absolute. And if this story speaks to you, if it lights that same fire in your spirit, I would be incredibly grateful if you would hit that subscribe button. Share your thoughts with us below and join our community so you never miss what happens next. Let us begin. 4 months later, on a crisp evening in San Francisco, the lights of the city's contemporary art museum cast a sophisticated glow over the Black Tie Innovation Gala. Anya Petrova stood near a shimmering light installation, the very image of serene composure. Her expression was placid, her gaze unwavering, her entire demeanor radiating a powerful stillness. She wore a stunningly simple sapphire blue gown, a dress that communicated effortless authority and immense wealth. Her blonde hair was cut in a sleek, modern bob. Not a single strand was out of place. To any person there, she was the picture of the loyal, supportive wife. But underneath that calm facade, a cold, precise fury was being honed to a razor's edge. The voice of her husband, Julian, resonated from the podium, his speech filled with platitudes about disruption, innovation, and legacy. Anya had stopped believing in Julian's vision of legacy 4 months ago, on a horrifying night when she almost bled to death alone while he was at a strategy off-site in a coastal paradise with his lover. Now, at the gala, meant to celebrate his company's greatest triumph, a revolutionary product launch, she was about to trigger its public execution. Anya allowed herself a fleeting, internal smile, not of happiness, but of resolution. A debt was about to be paid in full. Her own words, forged in the sterile quiet of a hospital recovery room, echoed in her mind. They tell you a betrayal like that will break you, but it didn't break me. It reminded me of who I was. And the people who nearly took my son from me are about to learn that I am my godfather's goddaughter. And my godfather never, ever leaves a flank exposed. Julian wrapped up his speech to thunderous applause. Tech journalists began shouting questions. Anya didn't hear the noise. Her focus was locked on 2 figures celebrating in the spotlight. Her husband, Julian Croft, and his mistress, Chloe Vance, his chief strategy officer, standing proudly by his side. She could already picture their future media profiles. Julian Croft, indicted in a multi-billion-dollar securities fraud scandal. Chloe Vance, career in ashes, facing conspiracy charges. justice, served at absolute zero. But that was the destination: to understand how Anya Petrova was transformed from a hopeful, loving mother-to-be into the architect of a tech titan's downfall. We have to go back. Back to a morning that began like any other. Back to a life that appeared flawless on social media, but was built on a mountain of lies. 4 months earlier, the San Francisco fog was a thick, gray blanket against the glass. It was the kind of chill that penetrated even the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse in Pacific Heights. Anya Petrova moved through the stark, minimalist kitchen with the careful, measured steps of her third trimester. Her entire universe had been condensed to a single purpose: protecting the precious life growing inside her. It was a high-risk pregnancy, which made every single day a campaign of meticulous care. On the quartz countertop, a digital blood pressure monitor sat next to a row of prenatal supplements. She placed a hand over her belly, feeling the gentle, reassuring flutter of a kick. A small life who depended on her, and on a man who was increasingly becoming a stranger. She composed her face, pushing back against the low hum of anxiety that had been her constant companion for weeks. She smoothed the fabric of her silk maternity top, took a centering breath, and poured a glass of water. "Just a little bit longer, my love," she murmured. "We are almost at the finish line." The sharp, confident clicks of expensive shoes on the polished concrete floor announced him. Julian Croft appeared in the doorway, a human vortex of relentless momentum. He was already dressed in his daily armor, a $3,000 custom suit, designer sneakers, and a look of intense focus. He was wearing a different cologne, something she didn't recognize. He didn't look at her stomach. His eyes barely registered her presence. His world was compressed into the glowing screen of his phone, his thumb a blur as he swiped through encrypted messages. Anya watched him, a silent analyst of her own marriage, taking inventory of the small signals she had been trying to ignore for months. The way his laptop was always angled away from her. The faint, arrogant curl of his lip when he read certain messages. The absolute emotional void in his eyes when he finally did look at her. "My appointment with the perinatologist is at 2 o'clock this afternoon," Anya stated, her voice even. "I really need you to come with me this time." Julian didn't look up. "The final term sheets for the Series C funding are being signed today. I cannot just ditch a $50 million deal for a routine checkup. He said it was critical for you to be there." At that, he finally looked at her, his gaze arctic. The passionate, brilliant man she had married was gone, replaced by this ruthless executive. "Someone has to pay for this entire production, Anya. That includes the team of A-list doctors you insisted on. Or have you forgotten what it's like to have a payroll?" The insult hit its mark with surgical precision. Anya absorbed the blow, a familiar tightness in her chest. She had stepped away from a lauded career as an investigative journalist. She had put her own ambitions on hold to champion his, to create the stable foundation for the family they had both claimed to want so badly. And now he used that choice as a weapon. Julian grabbed his messenger bag from the counter. He didn't move to kiss her. He didn't touch her belly. He offered not a single word of acknowledgement for the child that was supposed to be their shared future. "Julian," she tried again, her voice softening, "please, he's going to go over the induction plan. It's getting very real." For a brief moment, something of the old Julian seemed to flash in his eyes. A flicker of genuine concern, maybe. Then it was gone, sealed away behind the familiar mask of unshakable ambition. "You can give me the summary tonight. I am building an empire for this family, Anya. You should try to appreciate the scale of what I'm doing." He strode out. The heavy front door swung shut, its smart lock engaging with a definitive hiss. Anya was left standing in the ringing silence of their perfect apartment. Her hands found their way back to her belly in a protective gesture. A question she'd been suppressing for months rose up with a sickening lurch. Was this baby a part of his empire, or just another asset for the brand? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to banish the thought. "Your father loves us," she whispered to her womb, the words feeling brittle and hollow. "He's just under enormous pressure. He is building something amazing for all of us." The lie felt like swallowing shards of glass. But what was the alternative? That the man she had built her world around now viewed their own child as an obstacle? That his perfect family was just another slide in his investor pitch deck? She shook her head, clinging to the desperate hope that she was wrong. "I love you," she promised the child inside her. "I love you more than anything on this entire planet." She had no way of knowing that in less than 12 hours, that love would face its most brutal test. The afternoon sun was melting into a bruised orange twilight when the first savage cramp tore through her. It was sudden, breathtaking, and completely wrong. She cried out, clutching the edge of the marble island to stay on her feet. A sickening wave of vertigo washed over her. Her doctor's urgent warnings about placental abruption screamed in her head. Another spasm seized her, stronger this time, stealing her breath away. She scrambled for her phone, dialing Julian's number with trembling fingers. It rang and rang before clicking over to his virtual assistant. She tried again. Voicemail. A fear colder than the San Francisco fog began to settle deep in her bones. She sent a text. "Something is very wrong. Call me now." Followed by, "Julian, please. It's the baby. Hospital." She was trapped, alone in their gilded cage, and the one person who had sworn to protect her had disappeared. He wasn't at some late-night server launch. He was in wine country with his mistress. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, sharper than the cramps tightening deep in her womb. She stared at the screen, at the picture of him in a place he never mentioned, while her own meticulously planned world started to fray and unravel. All the vague explanations, the endless work trips, the unfamiliar scent of perfume on his shirts, it all crashed down on her in a single, crushing wave. As she stared at that picture, another surge of pain ripped through her, more intense this time. She looked down and saw the crimson bloom spreading through the fabric of her lounge pants. Her doctor's last, urgent warning echoed in her ears. "Any real bleeding, Chloe? You don't hesitate for a second. You call 911 immediately." With the proof of her husband's lie burning on the laptop screen before her, she finally, with a shaking finger, dialed the 3 numbers that would save her life and obliterate his. His tone was gentle, but firm. "You are an incredibly resilient woman, Mrs. Croft, but your body is supporting 2 people right now, and this kind of stress is a serious risk. You must promise me you will call the moment you feel any cramping, any significant discomfort. Can you do that for me?" Chloe nodded, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "I'll call." "Excellent," the doctor smiled softly, looking at her file. "We will set up another appointment for next week. In the meantime, please, you need to find a way to rest." Chloe thanked him, pulled on her coat, and walked out of the medical center into the cool San Francisco fog. A storm was rolling in from the Pacific. Her phone vibrated, a message from Julian. "The server migration is a nightmare. Going to be an all-nighter. Don't wait up." She deleted it without a response. That evening, Chloe drifted through their Pacific Heights townhome with a quiet, measured slowness, as if some deep, primal part of her knew her peaceful life was about to shatter. She took a warm bath, mindful of her swollen abdomen. She slipped into a soft bamboo nightgown. She sat in the half-finished nursery, stroking her long hair and murmuring to the baby inside her. She gazed at a small bookshelf filled with beautifully bound children's books. "Which story should we have tonight, little one?" Chloe considered it, with a gentle smile. "The one about the giving tree." She took the well-loved book from the shelf. They had gone through it a dozen times, but Chloe never grew weary of it. A story about selfless love, about enduring loss and giving everything for another. She read the story out loud, her voice a calm, steady whisper, savoring each sentence, feeling the baby's soft movements against her palm. After she finished, a profound silence settled over the room, the distant foghorn a mournful rhythm against the beating of her own heart. "Mommy," she whispered to her belly, asking a question she was afraid to even think. "Are you going to be okay?" The question lingered in the quiet air. She leaned over, pressing her cheek against her own skin. "You're the toughest little fighter I know," she whispered, "and tough fighters never give up." A small, decisive kick answered her, and she smiled, letting her eyes close for a moment, watching the lights of the Golden Gate Bridge blur behind the mist. A couple of hours later, Chloe was in Julian's home office, tidying up, when she noticed it. A notification on their shared family tablet, which was synced to his work accounts. It was from his corporate calendar, a simple event reminder. Title: Angel Investor Mick. Location: Fairmont Hotel, Penthouse Suite. Time stamped for 10:15 p.m. Her hands went cold. She had expected a surge of white-hot fury, a violent shock. Instead, there was just a hollow, chilling certainty. A part of her had known for months. A part of her had felt the chasm growing between them. Chloe stared at the notification for a long moment. Then, with deliberate precision, she closed the tablet's cover. She could not fall apart now. Not yet. Not with a storm bearing down on the coast, and her son resting inside her. She could not face the collapse of her marriage while she was preparing for the creation of her family. Tomorrow, she told herself. I will deal with it tomorrow. But the tomorrow she imagined was never going to arrive, because in less than 2 hours, Chloe Croft's entire existence would be torn apart, and nothing would ever be the same again. The thing that woke Chloe at 1:17 a.m. was not the wind howling off the bay, but a sudden, searing pain that shot through her, followed by a terrifying gush of fluid. A contraction, like a vise of iron, clamped down from the inside. Her water had just broken. Her bare feet slid on the cold hardwood floor as she stumbled toward the bathroom. The reflection in the mirror made her blood run cold. Blood. She was only 7 months along. This was much too soon. The baby. Her hands flew to her belly, her eyes wide with fear. The old house seemed to creak as a powerful gust of wind rattled the windows, a low moan from the night. My son. Chloe fumbled for her phone, cradling her abdomen, feeling the frantic, weak movements inside. He was fighting, but something was horribly, terribly wrong. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely dial Julian's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried a second time. Voicemail. A third. Voicemail. She switched to text messages, her thumbs fumbling with the keys. Water broke. Am bleeding. Going to hospital. Please hurry. The status changed almost instantly. Delivered. Then, a few seconds later, right at 1:24 a.m. There was no reply. Chloe didn't have time to process the calculated cruelty of his silence. She dialed 911, her voice eerily calm as she gave the operator their address and explained the situation. The dispatcher told her to stay calm, to lie on her left side, and that an ambulance was on its way. She held herself, rocking gently, whispering the same phrase like a mantra. Stay with me, little boy. Mommy's right here. Help is on the way. You're a tough little fighter. Stay with me. Please, just stay with me. The baby shifted inside her, a weak, panicked flutter. Her lips formed a word she could barely speak. Daddy. "He's on his way, my love," Chloe lied, hot tears rolling down her face. "Daddy's on his way." But Daddy was not on his way. 40 floors up, in a penthouse suite, at the Fairmont, Julian Croft was tangled in high thread count sheets with a woman who was not his wife. Ava was everything Chloe was not. Young, ambitious, and free of the gentle vulnerability that came with carrying a child. Her slender body was draped across Julian's, her perfectly lacquered nails tracing patterns on his chest. Julian's personal phone vibrated on the bedside table. And again, and a third time. Ava reached for it, her motion languid as she glanced at the screen. She saw the name. She saw the word hospital. "She's texting again," Ava said softly, holding the phone out to Julian. "It says it's an emergency." Julian barely opened his eyes. He'd heard this song before. Chloe's constant anxiety. Her doctor had labeled her pregnancy high risk, and since then, she fretted over every single ache. "She's so high-strung," he mumbled, his voice slurred with sleep. "She imagines these pains. She works herself into a frenzy over absolutely nothing. She worries about every little thing." "But the text says she's bleeding," Ava noted, with a detached clinical curiosity. "Maybe you should call back." Julian reached over and silenced the phone, setting its screen down. "If it was a real emergency, her doctor would have called me. She knows I have this investor meeting." Ava accepted this with a small shrug. She hadn't given much thought to the baby. Children were messy complications, inconvenient diversions of money and attention that she felt were better spent elsewhere. She nestled back against Julian, running a hand down his stomach. "You're probably right," she purred. "She's just overreacting. Now, where were we?" Julian smiled and drew her closer, and 40 floors below, across a storm-swept city, a child was fighting for his life. The ambulance got there in 6 minutes. It felt like an eternity. The paramedics worked with efficient calm, getting Chloe onto a gurney, starting a line, and checking her vitals. They loaded her into the ambulance, her hand never once leaving her belly. The ride to the medical center was a dizzying smear of flashing lights, wailing sirens, and the insistent, frantic beeping of monitors. Chloe stared at the ceiling, whispering to her baby, telling him to hold on, that they were almost there, that he was going to be fine. But the pain was wrong. The bleeding was wrong. Everything was wrong. They burst through the emergency department doors at 1:31 a.m. A team of doctors and nurses descended on the gurney immediately, shouting medical jargon that Chloe couldn't comprehend. Someone began asking her questions, trying to get her patient history, but she couldn't concentrate. "My son, please. He's my son." A nurse, older than Chloe, with compassionate eyes and a strong grip, finally met her gaze. "We are going to do everything we can," the nurse said, her voice clear and steady. "But we need to get you into surgery this instant. Do you understand? You have to let us do our work." Chloe nodded, the words catching in her throat like sand. A deep, impossible chill spread through her as they wheeled her gurney down the corridor, a blur of blinking monitors and quiet, determined hands. She dialed Marcus's number one final time. It went straight to his assistant's voicemail. She left a frantic message, her voice cracking. "Marcus, please. It's our baby. It's happening now. Please come to the hospital. Please." She waited. She prayed. She tried to make a deal with a universe she was no longer sure was listening. "Please, just let him be okay. Please." At 1:47 a.m., they fitted an oxygen mask over her face. A long, unbroken tone replaced the frantic beeping of the monitor. It was a sound that would haunt Chloe's quietest moments for the rest of her life. When she came to, her doctor was standing beside her bed, his expression a careful mask of sorrow and exhaustion. He didn't need to speak. Chloe already felt the emptiness inside her. "Mrs. Thorne, I am so deeply sorry. We did everything in our power." Chloe's legs felt like concrete beneath the thin hospital sheet. She swung them over the side of the bed, her entire body numb, until her bare feet touched the cold, sterile tiles. A sound ripped from her chest that was not human, a raw, wounded cry that echoed down the silent, polished hall. Her son, her beautiful tiny boy, gone. The Miami hospital suite was as silent as a crypt at 2 in the morning. Chloe sat numbly, clutching a small blue knitted cap the nurse had left for him. It smelled of nothing. Her iPad on the nightstand chimed with a notification. Not a message, but an alert from the shared family cloud she'd forgotten they even had. A new album had been created. Title, Bimini Weekend. A thumbnail showed her husband, Marcus, laughing on a yacht with his lead architect, Isabel. The sterile quiet of the private room was an insult. The bright white linens, a stark contrast to the new, gaping hole in Chloe's world. She had picked up her iPad to look up bereavement counselors when the photo notification appeared. A name she knew all too well, Isabel. With a single tap, an entire world of betrayal opened up, an album filled with sun-drenched images of a lavish weekend getaway, a receipt from a jeweler in her email for a custom diamond tennis bracelet, geotags from a private resort in the Bahamas. A caption under a photo of the two of them clinking champagne glasses read, "To the projects we build together, the best is yet to come." Chloe's eyes locked on the timestamps, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of her marriage. They corresponded, to the minute, with the hours she had spent in this very room, terrified and alone, losing their son. The sound that escaped her lips wasn't a sob. It was the quiet, sharp crack of a soul splintering apart. He had ignored 8 calls while their son's small heart faded away. 8 chances to be a husband, to be a father, and he had chosen her. In that instant, Chloe's crushing grief began to change, crystallizing into something cold, clear, and dangerously sharp. The abyss of her sorrow was still there, but a new foundation was being laid within it, one forged from pure, diamond-hard resolve. She looked at the little blue cap the nurse had given her, the only thing she would ever have of Leo's. She folded it with meticulous care and placed it in her handbag. By the time Marcus floated back from his business trip, she would be ready. Marcus Thorne walked into their Star Island mansion just after 10 in the morning, smelling of salt air and expensive rum. He had his story perfected. A sudden, high-stakes emergency with the international backers for his new tower, an all-night negotiation that had secured the entire project. He stopped short in the grand foyer. Chloe was sitting in the sunroom, the pale morning light turning her into a statue of gray marble. She was perfectly still, her hands resting on her stomach, which was now cruelly, unnaturally flat. On the glass table before her, her iPad screen was lit. "Chloe," Marcus began, his voice a perfect performance of weary concern. "My God, I am so sorry. The deal was a complete nightmare. My phone died. The talks went on all night. By the time I could get a signal, I figured you'd be asleep. I didn't want to disturb you." Chloe remained silent. She just watched him, her eyes as empty and vast as the bay outside, completely stripped of the admiration he had always treated as his due. He faltered, her stillness throwing him off script. He had prepared for tears, for drama, for emotions he knew how to handle. "Is everything okay, honey?" he asked, a flicker of real anxiety in his voice. "The baby, is he all right?" Chloe finally spoke, her voice a hollow whisper. "Leo is gone. We lost him at 3:20 this morning, Marcus." His handsome face went slack, the mask of concern slipping to reveal a brief flash of authentic shock. "What?" "I started having complications last night. I called you 8 times. My phone log, shows every single call went through. Chloe, my phone was on silent. We were in a secure meeting, I swear. I didn't see anything until it was over. I thought the doctor said it was just a precaution, that you only needed to rest. I thought he was going to be fine. Chloe slowly slid a finger across the iPad's screen, opening the photo gallery. A vibrant picture of him and Isabel, laughing, with the turquoise water of the Bahamas behind them. The presidential villa, $15,000 a night, charged to the development project. Marcus's composure finally shattered. She saw panic and quick calculation warring in his eyes. The calculation won. It was for the investors, the Saudi team. We needed a private, neutral venue to sign the final papers. Isabel had to be there to walk them through the architectural plans. This isn't what it looks like. She swiped again, bringing up a close-up photo. Him, fastening a new, sparkling diamond bracelet onto Isabel's wrist. A signing bonus? She asked, her voice devoid of all warmth. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room, a vacuum where his lies had nowhere left to go. He said, his voice dropping into the patient, condescending tone she had come to despise. You're in shock. You've been through a terrible trauma, and you need somewhere to direct your anger. I get it. We can talk about this when you are thinking more clearly. Chloe stood. She felt taller, as if she'd been stooping for years to accommodate his ego without realizing it. The nurse said he looked just like you, she said, her voice quiet but lethal. She told me our son died while I was alone, calling for his father, and you were giving diamonds to another woman. Marcus took a half-step back, as if struck. He had never seen this look in her eyes. It was cold, analytical, and utterly without fear. Chloe, listen to me. You are not yourself. Grief is making you paranoid. Let me call Dr. Evans. We can work through this, together. Get out. The command was a whisper, but it cut through the air like a shard of glass. This is my house, Marcus blustered, his arrogance returning as he found his footing. I'm not going anywhere. You are having some kind of emotional breakdown, and you need to rest. We'll sort this out tomorrow. Chloe took a step toward him, so close he could see the glacial frost forming in her eyes. Before I opened my art gallery, I spent 3 years managing my father's political action committees. I specialized in opposition research. I know exactly how you've been bribing city commissioners to get your zoning variances for the Thorn Tower. I know about the falsified environmental impact studies. I know about the offshore accounts you're using to funnel the money. I know the editors at the Miami Herald who would be very interested to see the proof. So, when I tell you to get out, I am not asking. I am telling you. And you have 5 minutes before I start ruining your life. Marcus stared at her. For the first time in their entire relationship, he looked truly afraid. He grabbed his keys and was gone, without another word. Chloe watched him go, then she collapsed back into the chair, picked up the tiny blue cap, and held it to her face. She allowed herself 1 minute for grief, 1 minute to let a single, silent, violent sob shake her to her core, to fall completely apart. Then she wiped her face, straightened her back, and picked up her phone. She found a contact she had not touched in 6 years, a contact Marcus had convinced her was a manipulative, controlling relic who threatened their future. A single initial, R. Her thumb hovered over the name, a sea of memories flooding her. Marcus's voice, so smooth, so convincing. Your father is a dinosaur, Chloe. He trades in favors and threats. He will never approve of me. If you want us to have a real marriage, you have to choose. She had chosen Marcus. It was the single biggest mistake of her life, but it was a mistake she could still correct. She pressed the call button. The phone was picked up on the very first ring by a gruff voice she had longed to hear for years, a voice that sounded like It had been waiting for this exact moment. Chloe. Dad. Her own voice broke. Leo's gone, and I'm all alone. There was a short pause. Then, in a tone of cold, controlled fury, I'm on my way. Robert Sterling, the most influential political fixer in Florida, hung up and boarded his plane in Tallahassee. 3 hours after her phone call, he was there. He had flown from the state capital to Miami without a second thought. Chloe opened the door to a man who looked harder than she remembered. 6 years had put more silver in his hair and etched deeper lines around his eyes. But the eyes themselves were the same, sharp, assessing. The eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime in political trenches, spotting weaknesses and planning his attacks. He took one look at his daughter's shattered expression and folded her into his arms. Chloe broke against his chest. Model. It was the first time she'd cried since she left the emergency room. A brittle strength had carried her through Liam's arrival. The sterile questions, the confrontation, and his final, icy directive. But wrapped in her father's arms, Amelia finally shattered. I pushed you away, she gasped, words torn apart by sobs. For so long, I believed him when he called you controlling, when he said I had to choose. I chose him, and now Leo is gone, and I have nothing left. Robert held her closer. I knew what he was saying. I knew what he was doing, and having to watch it all from a distance was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. He pulled back, holding her face between his palms, a gesture from a time of scraped knees and childhood fears. Tell me everything, he commanded gently. Every last detail. So she did, the affair she'd suspected for months. The night the contractions started too early, the 14 unanswered calls to his phone, the damning charge from a boutique hotel in Napa on his expense report, Liam's pathetic and transparent lies, followed by his cruel indifference. When she was done, Robert was quiet for a long time, his jaw set like stone, his eyes narrowed with a cold, strategic light. Amelia knew that expression. It was the look he got before a hostile takeover. What do you want? He asked finally. Amelia looked straight at him. The grief was a permanent part of her now, a cold star burning in her chest, but in the last few hours, it had been forged into something else. I want to destroy him, she said, her voice quiet and absolute. Everything he has, his firm, his capital, his reputation. I want him to know exactly how it feels to have absolutely nothing. Robert gave a single, deliberate nod. Then that is what we will do. We will be methodical. We will be thorough. And we will show no mercy. No emotional moves, no rash acts. We map our strategy, we secure the intelligence, we build our case. And when it's done, Liam Sterling won't even be a footnote on a balance sheet. Ben spoke with the detached precision he might use to brief a client on a new security threat. Clinical, pragmatic, and utterly certain. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Amelia felt a fragile flicker of something she had thought was lost forever. Hope. How? She whispered. Ben swiped a finger across a hardened laptop, revealing a complex web of encrypted servers and firewalls, the digital equivalent of the battle plans he used to design in his former life in government cybersecurity. First, we need legal firepower. You were an architectural designer before you quit to support his career. Do you have any old contacts from that world who could be allies? Amelia thought for a moment. One name rose to the surface. Olivia Chen, she said. My roommate from Northwestern. She's a senior partner at her firm now, one of the best financial fraud litigators in Chicago. Ben raised an eyebrow. Roommate? I don't think I've heard her name in at least 5 years. The shame was a bitter taste in her mouth. I cut her out, Amelia admitted. Liam convinced me she was too aggressive, that she was a bad influence. He said her ambition was unattractive, so I just let her go. And you think she'll take your case now? Amelia thought of Olivia's unyielding loyalty, her stubborn refusal to let a friendship die, the way she'd kept sending birthday messages long after Amelia had gone silent. I do. Good. Call her, Ben instructed, his eyes already back on the screen. Now, for the leverage. You mentioned hidden investment accounts and offshore dealings. Do you have access? I have breadcrumbs. I have screenshots of wire transfers and deleted emails I managed to recover. But the heavily encrypted material, I only found out about Chloe because my husband, Liam, had an appointment on his work calendar that accidentally synced to our family tablet. It was for a suite at a 5-star hotel, labeled Anniversary C. That night, I knew I needed to get inside his entire digital life, his encrypted drives, his firm's private servers, everything. My brother, Ben, gave me a small, chilling smile I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. It's a good thing, he said, that I spent a decade in signals intelligence. I still have friends who specialize in finding things that were never meant to be found. I hesitated. Is that legal? Ben's smile never faltered. We can debate the finer points of the law after we've secured the evidence. 3 days later, I was sitting across from Olivia Chen in a stark, minimalist coffee shop in the Loop. The air between us was heavy with the silence of 5 lost years and a friendship I had thrown away. Olivia looked like the epitome of Chicago success. Her suit was sharp and custom-tailored, and she projected an aura of absolute control. But the moment she saw me, 7 months pregnant and looking like I might disintegrate, her professional mask vanished. Her eyes went wide. "Amelia," she breathed. "Oh my God, I knew you were pregnant. I am so unbelievably happy for you." She pulled me into a hug that instantly melted away, 5 years of regret and distance. We found a secluded booth, our voices low over expensive coffees we barely touched. "I need your help, Olivia," I finally said, "and not just as a friend. I need the best financial fraud attorney in this city." Everyone I talked to said that's you. Olivia nodded slowly, her expression becoming intensely focused. "I can handle the financial settlement in a divorce, Amelia, but judging by the look in your eyes, you're here for more than that." I pushed a tablet across the table. On it was the proof I had. The screenshot of the calendar appointment, records of suspicious wire transfers, and the first few files Ben's contacts had managed to decrypt. "Liam had me authorize things," I explained, my voice trembling slightly. "He called them angel investments, for our retirement, for the baby's future. I never once questioned him. I trusted him. But now, I know they were something else." Olivia picked up the tablet, and with each file she opened, the compassionate friend transformed into a razor-sharp lawyer. "These aren't angel investments," she said at last, her voice dangerously quiet. "These are untraceable wire transfers to shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. Amelia, if this data is real, your husband has been using your digital signature to capitalize a series of ghost companies." "What is that supposed to mean?" I asked, a wave of cold dread washing over me. "It means you have to find out exactly what those companies are for. Because if they're being used for anything illicit, like laundering money or hiding assets from his investment partners, your signature makes you the primary signatory. In a courtroom, that makes you a willing participant." The blood drained from my face. So he wasn't just cheating on me. He was making me his accomplice. "That is very likely what this is." Olivia's hand covered mine on the cold tabletop. "But this is also how we take him apart. If we can prove he intentionally deceived you, that you authorized these transfers under false pretenses, with no knowledge of their true purpose, we can flip this whole thing on its head. He's no longer the brilliant venture capitalist. He's the architect of a massive fraud, and you are his first and most important victim. How could we ever prove that? I asked. We start by building a complete forensic map of his financial empire. Every wire transfer you ever signed, every anonymous LLC he ever formed. We follow the money, and we hire a forensic accountant who is an absolute shark with this kind of thing. I took a deep breath, feeling a surge of pure determination. I can do that. My brother is already getting us access to Liam's company servers. Your brother? Olivia looked shocked. I thought the two of you were estranged. My jaw tightened. We were. But finding out your brother-in-law is a faithless liar who is setting up his pregnant wife to be a criminal scapegoat tends to put old arguments into perspective. Olivia was quiet for a moment, then she squeezed my hand. I told you back at Northwestern that something about Liam always felt hollow, she said softly. You said I was being jaded. I know, I whispered, the words thick with apology. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, she said, her voice turning to steel. Be ready, because I am going to help you get there. Olivia's eyes narrowed with a fierce light. We are going to do this, side by side, no matter what happens. I am in your corner. For the first time since my phone had buzzed with that calendar notification, I felt a spark of something other than pure, agonizing betrayal. I felt the resilience of a friendship I was sure I had destroyed, the quiet power of a bond that had bent but had not broken. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with unshed tears. Olivia offered a grim smile. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we have a court order that freezes every single dollar in that monster's offshore accounts. The digital excavation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of my life spent staring at lines of code, of late-night, encrypted video calls with Ben's team of ethical hackers and financial analysts. I was transformed during those 2 weeks. The weeping ended. I started to eat, to sleep in disciplined, 2-hour blocks, to function. I was not the person I had been before. Some core piece of me had been altered. The pain was still a constant presence, but it had calcified into something useful, something I could wear like a shield. With a cold, surgical precision, I dissected the last 4 years of my life, documenting every time Liam had handed me a tablet, murmuring, "Just sign off on this, babe, it's for our future." Every late-night approval I had been too trusting or too tired to ever question. I remembered him setting up new investment vehicles he called our nest egg. I remember being drowsy, placing my complete faith in my husband as I authorized the e-signatures on my tablet without a second thought. He had turned my trust into a weapon against me. At the same time, my uncle started calling in favors. His old colleagues from the prosecutor's office were now partners at forensic accounting firms, specializing in tracking dark money. In just 10 days, they legally pieced together a 5-year history of Arthur's financial dealings. What they found turned my stomach. A tangled network of shell corporations, all registered under my name and social security number, were being used to launder money to city officials in exchange for favorable zoning changes on his downtown developments. The payment records showed hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing to offshore accounts just before the City Planning Commission would approve one of his controversial skyscraper proposals. He's been bribing city officials for years, my uncle explained, gravely, during one of our encrypted conversations. The real question is, who else is involved? Is he the mastermind? Or is this a much larger conspiracy tied to City Hall? I stared at the spreadsheets, my past life as an art curator feeling a million miles away. Some of these payments are strange, I noted, my eye for detail catching something off. Look here. He's sending a massive payment to a Cayman account right before a vote on a public park project. His company had nothing to do with that. Which implies he has partners in this, my uncle concluded. That was a danger for another day. For now, we had what we needed. 2 weeks after I first received the anonymous tip, I was sitting in Nina's sleek downtown office, looking at a mountain of digital proof. Evidence of bribery, decrypted texts detailing his affair with Cassandra, and the most damning file of them all, activity logs that Nina's expert had pulled from our smart home's central server. The server logs showed Arthur's precise activity on the night I had a pregnancy complication 2 months prior. I had been calling him over and over while my sister rushed me to the hospital. I watched the screen as Nina replayed the log. It showed him in his home office. It showed my name flashing across his smart watch, call after unanswered call, and it showed him dismissing each one. He then sent a voice-to-text message to Cassandra that said, "Just a minor issue at the site. I'll handle it tomorrow." He knew, I whispered, my voice chillingly calm. He knew I was bleeding and on my way to the ER, and he chose to ignore it for her. Nina nodded, her expression hardening into cold fury. This, combined with the financial crimes, gives us everything we need to bury him. Are you ready for me to file? I looked at the files on the monitor, all the betrayal and heartache reduced to data and legal briefs. I thought about the child growing inside me, about the life I was now forced to rebuild from scratch. I thought of every excuse he ever gave for working late at the office. "File it," I commanded. Nina picked up her desk phone, but as her thumb hovered over the keypad, my cell phone buzzed. A text from a blocked number. I read it, and a wave of ice washed over me. "You should have kept your head down." The text was stark. "Walk away. You have no idea what you're messing with." I showed the phone to Nina, my lawyer, who read it with a sharp frown. "That doesn't sound like Arthur," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "He uses corporate lawyers and subtle threats, not this kind of blunt intimidation. This is from someone else, someone who knows we're looking into the money." "Did you mention this investigation to anyone at his company?" Nina asked. "Never. This has to be connected to the person who sent the original anonymous tip." Nina placed her phone carefully back onto its charging stand. "Do you want to pause this? Perhaps we should reconsider our strategy." I thought about it for half a second before shaking my head. "Absolutely not. We're filing first thing in the morning," I announced. "Hiding won't do me any good against whoever sent this or against Arthur. We move forward, we hit them hard, and we find out who's really pulling the strings." Nina's professional demeanor broke into a fierce, satisfied smile. "That's the Eliza I was waiting for," she said. "It's good to have you back." We filed the divorce petition that Thursday. By Friday night, my world had imploded all over again. It began with a hard, official rap on the door of my condo. 2 people, a man and a woman in conservative dark suits, stood in the hall, their FBI badges clipped to their belts. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Agent Harris." "And I'm Agent Shaw. We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding several real estate holding companies." My stomach plummeted. I recognized the names they listed. They were the very shell corporations from Nina's files. "What about them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You are listed as the sole proprietor and signatory on all of them," Agent Harris said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We've traced a number of suspicious payments moving through these accounts, all linked to city zoning board approvals." "I don't know anything about that," I insisted. "My husband told me they were just for tax purposes, paperwork for our estate." "We hear that a lot, Mrs. Vance." Agent Shaw spoke then, his voice sharp with professional doubt. "May we come inside?" I wanted to scream, "No," to lock the door and call Nina, call my uncle, call anyone. But I knew what refusing entry to federal agents would imply. "Yes, of course," I said. stepping back. Please. They questioned me for what felt like days, but the clock showed it was only 4 hours. When they were done, I felt completely hollowed out. They had everything: wire transfer authorizations, with my digital signature, moving huge sums of money to untraceable accounts just before critical city council votes on Arthur's building projects. They had built a perfect case, a legal trap, and my name was on the door. As soon as they were gone, I sank onto the sofa, staring blankly at the wall. Arthur hadn't just cheated on me. He hadn't just abandoned me while I was pregnant. He had, over years, methodically constructed a criminal enterprise with me as the designated scapegoat. My phone buzzed, the same blocked number. I tried to tell you. A second message arrived immediately after. It was a forwarded email. My hand trembled as I tapped it open. It was a flight confirmation for a private jet, scheduled to leave from Chicago Midway later that night. The destination was a small island nation in the Caribbean with no extradition treaty with the U.S., and the passenger manifest listed only 2 people, Arthur and Cassandra. A legal summons was delivered by a courier to Eliza's new, much humbler apartment. Arthur Vance was suing for sole custody of their unborn child, alleging that she was mentally unstable, a threat to his real estate empire, and a danger to herself. The filing was filled with sworn statements from people she once thought were friends, vice presidents from Arthur's company. People she'd hosted for dinner parties were now testifying that she was prone to paranoia and acts of revenge. Her phone rang. It was Nina, her lawyer. Eliza, we have a serious problem. I know, I just read the summons. Arthur wants to take the baby. It's far worse than that, Nina said, her voice tight with urgency. Arthur filed for divorce this morning. He's getting ahead of the story, and the accusations he's making are toxic. What accusations? He's claiming your pregnancy has triggered severe emotional distress, that you threatened to sabotage his new high-rise project, and that he is the victim, desperately trying to protect his legacy. He's got his entire executive team prepared to lie for him under oath. That's insane. I put my career as a museum curator on hold for 3 years to support him and his vision. I was there for every late-night planning meeting, every city board hearing. Arthur was the one who was never around. I know that, and will prove it. But Eliza, his version of events is already making the rounds in the Chicago business press. Arthur's mother, who is a director on his main investment fund, has been calling every influential person in the city. The establishment is already taking his side, not yours. Eliza pressed her fingers to her eyes, fighting a surge of dizziness. So he's making me out to be the villain. Precisely, the unhinged pregnant wife who drove him to his chief counsel for comfort, the greedy spouse trying to ruin his company, the criminal architect of the bribery scandal he's under investigation for. He's trying to completely destroy your credibility before you even get a chance to speak. How do we even begin to fight that? We fight back with the facts, the forged signatures on the shell company documents, the texts from his mistress, the smart home data. We tell our own story, and we leak it to a credible reporter before he can plant any more lies, Nina added, then took a breath. This is where it gets dangerous. If the FBI is convinced you were a willing partner in the bribery, you could be facing a long prison sentence. Our first job is to prove he manipulated you into signing those documents, that you had no idea you were helping him launder bribe money to city officials. How much time will that take? It's impossible to say. It could be weeks. It could be months. Eliza looked up at the ceiling of her cramped new apartment, noticing a faint water stain. Not even a month ago, she was an expectant mother living in a penthouse, married to a real estate mogul, with what she thought was a perfect life. Now she was facing a bitter divorce, framed as the unstable party in a high-stakes separation, and enduring a relentless smear campaign designed to obliterate her reputation. "My father," she said suddenly. "Did you speak with him?" "He reached out about an hour ago. He's already in motion. His message was for you to hold the line." "What is he planning?" "He didn't specify, and I knew better than to ask. But Sophia, I've known Damian Petrov for a very long time. That man doesn't make threats. He dismantles operations. Whatever he's orchestrating, someone is about to experience a profound reversal of fortune." "I hope so," Sophia murmured. "I truly, desperately hope so." The following 2 weeks were the most isolating Sophia had ever endured. The official divorce filing arrived, accompanied by an injunction that locked her out of all their shared digital wallets and investment portfolios, leaving her financially paralyzed. She was summoned to a tense meeting with Julian's legal team, where every question was a veiled accusation. At every turn, she encountered the sharp sting of social exile. Former friends from the city's venture capital elite would suddenly find their phones fascinating if she approached at a coffee shop. At a fundraiser in Pacific Heights, the wife of a well-known tech founder cornered her, her voice dripping with condescension. "I've heard what you're attempting to do to Julian," she announced, loud enough for half the room to overhear. "He is a visionary, creating the future of this city, and you're trying to tear him down because of some petty grievance. You should be utterly ashamed." Sophia didn't utter a word. She set her champagne flute down on a passing tray, left her half-finished canapé, and walked out of the penthouse with her spine straight, determined not to grant them the spectacle of her tears. But later, inside the sterile silence of her new apartment, with the blinds shut and the city lights blurred out, the composure shattered. She sank to the floor of the room she had planned as a nursery, clutching a grainy sonogram image, and wept until she was hollow. Afterward, she simply remained there, staring at the empty wall. She wondered if this was how it concluded, not with a dramatic courtroom victory, but with a silent, soul-crushing capitulation. Her phone vibrated. A message from her father. "Inbound. We need to revise our strategy." 30 minutes later, Damian Petrov entered the apartment and saw his daughter looking utterly broken. He offered no hollow platitudes. He didn't promise everything would be okay. He just moved a chair to face her, his gaze as sharp and analytical as ever. "You are making the fundamental mistake of every cornered operative," he stated, his voice calm and measured. "You're confusing the loss of your current position with the loss of the entire strategic map." Sophia could only shake her head. "He has everything, Dad. The money, the top law firms in the Bay Area. He controls the entire narrative. The press thinks I'm a vindictive gold digger. I have nothing." "Nothing?" Her father leaned in. "You have me. You have the unassailable truth. And you have leverage that Julian Croft is too arrogant to even comprehend. I did not spend 30 years navigating the treachery of global intelligence just to see some tech wunderkind with a messiah complex destroy my family. We are not going to engage in his game, Sophia. We are going to play ours. And our game is asymmetrical." "How?" A very faint, unsettling smile touched her father's lips. "We remove the pillars, holding his empire up one by one. We ensure that every person who enabled him understands the cost of their allegiance. When we are through, Julian Croft won't have a single ally left in San Francisco. And that is when he will finally learn the true meaning of having nothing." The private tasting room of a restaurant in Nob Hill was an exercise in understated power. Reclaimed wood, panoramic city views, and a single, long oak table. Damian Petrov sat at one end of the table with a bottle of sparkling water before him. Across from him sat two men in tailored casual wear, the lead managing partner of the venture capital fund, and the influential tech journalist who were Julian Croft's most essential backers. "Gentlemen," Damien began, his tone disarmingly pleasant, "I appreciate you making the time. I understand you are both deeply committed to the success of Julian's latest innovation fund." The venture capitalist, a man named Alistair, nodded cautiously. "Your reputation is well known, Mr. Petrov. When someone like you asks for a meeting, it's wise to accept. What can we do for you, Mr. Petrov? It is more about what I can do for all of us, gentlemen." The former intelligence consultant, Damien Petrov, slid a slim, encrypted tablet across the polished oak table. "I have become aware of some deeply concerning irregularities within Apex Ventures. Specifically, falsified due diligence and material misrepresentations originating from your star partner, Julian Croft." The two powerful men exchanged a quick, unreadable look. Damien saw the flicker of alarm behind their composed facades. "What kind of irregularities?" the journalist Sterling asked, his voice sharp. Damien tapped the dark screen of the tablet. "Fabricated user engagement metrics for a portfolio company on the verge of its next funding round. A shell corporation in the Cayman Islands used to hide significant liabilities. All of it done in collusion with that company's chief financial officer, Isabelle Renaud, and personally vouched for by Mr. Croft." A thick, tense quiet filled the room. "Now," Damien went on, "I am not suggesting either of you were aware of this. I am certain you are as appalled as I am to discover that one of your most trusted partners has been leveraging your firm's good name to perpetrate a calculated fraud. If this is accurate," Sterling said, his voice now cold steel, "why are you showing this to us? Why not go directly to the SEC? Because I believe in allowing professionals the chance to contain a contamination before it triggers a full-scale quarantine. And because regulators, once they detect fraud, tend to be thorough. They will not finish with Mr. Croft. They will demand to know how the firm's own due diligence process failed so spectacularly, what that failure implies about the partners at this table, and what other secrets might be hiding in your portfolio." The threat was as clear and cutting as a surgeon's scalpel. The other man, Alistair, was clenching his jaw so hard it looked like it might crack. "What is it you want, Petrov?" Sterling asked, his tone devoid of any previous warmth. Damien looked him straight in the eye. "My requirements are straightforward. I want Julian Croft terminated. For cause, effective immediately. I want a discreet internal audit into Isabelle Renaud and the fraudulent deal. And I demand an unbreakable assurance that my daughter's name will never be associated with the inevitable fallout. And if we say no, then the full contents of this tablet, along with a trove of corroborating data, gets delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Wall Street Journal, and a few hungry tech bloggers who would turn a scandal of this size into a career-making story. But I suspect that the men who manage a $2 billion fund have the most to lose in that scenario." Sterling maintained his intense gaze for a long, heavy moment. Then he reached for the tablet and powered it on. Damien waited, watching the blood drain from their faces as they scrolled through the falsified reports and the damning, encrypted messages. Finally, Sterling looked up at Alistair. A silent, grim consensus was reached between them. "We will have to verify this," Alistair said, his voice a low growl. "Naturally," Damien said, rising from his chair. "I would insist upon it. But I suggest you verify it with expediency. This kind of information has a tendency to become volatile if not properly handled." He walked toward the door, then stopped. "And one last thing, gentlemen. My daughter is pregnant with my first grandchild. Mr. Croft was using their community property to finance his affair with Miss Renaud. his partner in this fraud. So when I say that I want him gone, I trust you understand that I am displaying a truly extraordinary amount of professional restraint. He was gone. 2 days later, Julian Croft strode into the minimalist lobby of Apex Ventures, only to be met by two impassive men from corporate security. "Mr. Croft," the chief of security said, his voice flat, "we're going to need you to come with us." "What's going on?" "The partners have some questions about the Hyperion account." Julian's signature arrogance flickered for a moment as he was guided toward the executive elevator. He registered the abrupt halt of conversations among the junior associates, the way his own executive assistant suddenly refused to make eye contact, the laser-like focus everyone now had on their laptop screens. Inside the main glass-walled conference room, both senior partners were waiting, their faces grim. "Julian," Alistair said, his voice completely empty of its usual camaraderie. "Take a seat. What the hell is this all about? You are being put on indefinite administrative leave, pending a forensic audit into a series of gross misrepresentations to this firm." Julian's face turned white. "That's absurd." "Whatever you think you've found, there is a simple and logical explanation for it." "I have no doubt there is," Alistair replied. "But until our independent auditors find it, you are walled off from the firm. Your network access, your key card, and all your corporate expense accounts have been suspended. Security will escort you from the premises after you've collected your personal effects. You can't do this. We are." The firm's attorney slid a tablet across the table, displaying the official letter of his suspension. "If you intend to challenge this decision, I suggest you speak with your attorneys, but I would strongly advise against causing a disturbance. Tech journalists have a tendency to notice when our senior partners are escorted out by security." Julian's gaze flickered from the tablet's harsh glow to the stone-faced executives, then to the two large guards framing the doorway. For the first time, a wave of raw panic washed over him. "This is nowhere near finished," he seethed, snatching the device. "You have no idea who you're making an enemy of." "Perhaps," Elias replied, his voice like ice, "but we are correcting our own oversight." "Enjoy your afternoon, Mr. Croft." Clara found out about Julian's forced leave of absence from a calm, direct call from her father. "It's a power grab. They're trying to force me out," he had yelled into her messages. She erased it without a second thought and dialed her father. How were you so sure he would react that way? "I simply cast a light on a very dark transaction, Clara." They decided how to handle the rot. What's our next step? Now, we observe. Julian will be desperate. He will contact his confidants, his partner in this, anyone he believes can save him. And we will be monitoring everything. That will show us the true scale of this scheme. And the financial risk to me? Your legal team is building a firewall, but Clara, the investigator, Leo, has submitted his preliminary findings. The encrypted messaging app they were using was the key that unlocked their entire operation. Excellent work. But can he claim it wasn't him? We can prove it was. We have device IDs and network logs, placing him on that app at every critical moment. What we don't have yet is proof of who was directing him. My people are on it. Clara drew a long, steadying breath. It was the first time in months she felt like she could actually breathe. "Thank you, Dad. Don't thank me just yet. We're only at the beginning." The next critical piece of the puzzle arrived from a place she never expected. Leo called Clara 3 days after Julian was ousted, his voice taut with a kind of urgency she'd never heard from him. "I've been conducting a deep background investigation on Ava Moreno," he began, "and I have something huge." "What is it?" "She isn't just Julian's mistress. She is the mastermind behind this entire fraud." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she chose Julian with the precision of a predator stalking its prey. Years ago." She profiled him long before he ever met her. She knew about his role at Helios. She knew about your family and the Vance shipping dynasty. Why? Because this isn't her first time executing a corporate sabotage. Just a different alias, a different city, a different pawn. I've found her fingerprints on at least 3 other similar incidents. Clara, Ava Moreno is a completely manufactured identity. We have no idea what her real name is. She has a sealed Interpol file from when she was a minor for a major biotech patent fraud in Geneva over a decade ago. She scrubbed her history clean and built a new life from nothing. Clara felt the awful, chilling logic of it all fall into place. So Julian was never the one in control. Julian was the tool, a puppet she could manipulate. Ava has been playing a game of high-stakes chess, and he believed he was the king. But why our family? We aren't venture capital. Julian's income is substantial, but it's not generational wealth. Your father, Leo's voice turned grim. She targeted Julian to get to you, and she targeted you to get to Elias Vance. Your father's reputation was built on hostile takeovers of his competitors. Someone with a long memory and very deep pockets would see hiring a ghost like her as the ultimate form of revenge. Clara sank back into the sofa. She had thought Julian was the monster. She couldn't have been more wrong. Julian was just the weapon. The true enemy was a specter she'd never even met. Does my father know this? He's being informed as we speak. And Clara, he is absolutely livid. I can only guess. There's something else. That private investment account they set up in both their names? A massive portion of the funds has been transferred to a secondary, untraceable crypto wallet. A wallet that carries the digital signature of one of Ava's previous operations. She's been bleeding their own scheme dry from the inside. Julian probably doesn't even know. So her endgame was to bankrupt the firm, destroy my family's name, and then disappear with all the money, leaving Julian to face the consequences. That appears to be the strategy, yes. Clara shut her eyes. The sheer scope of the deceit was breathtaking. She had nearly lost her baby, her husband, her family's legacy, and her own peace of mind, all because of a phantom she never knew existed. What do we do now? Now, Leo said, we give them just enough rope to hang each other, and then we strike a match. The approach was brutally effective. Ava had manipulated Julian for years, preying on his ambition and his ego, while he was certain he was the one calling the shots. All Clara and her team needed to do was reveal the strings. His own narcissism and instinct for self-preservation would take care of the rest. It began with a carefully fabricated set of lab results, a digital honeypot made to look like a confidential leak from within Ava's own biotech company. It was placed on a private server that Julian, in his frantic search for something to save himself, was certain to hack into. Every file in the dossier told the same story. Ava was not his partner in crime. She was the director of the entire show, and she was moments away from cutting him loose and vanishing with their entire illicit fortune. Julian, being Julian, responded with pure, wounded rage. The showdown took place in her sterile, glass-walled laboratory overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Julian burst in, holding a tablet displaying fraudulent research data, his face a contorted mask of fury. "You've been faking the data," he accused. "This entire time, you've been creating ghost trials and billing the firm for research that never happened. You were setting me up to be the sole perpetrator of investor fraud." Ava remained perfectly still. She had envisioned this exact confrontation. "Envisioned what, Julian, my love? Your paranoia is getting the better of you. Whatever fabricated data you believe you have, I am positive there's a logical explanation." "Explain this," he demanded, shoving the tablet at her. It revealed falsified patient logs, forged FDA filings, and a clear digital trail that led directly to a crypto wallet he knew nothing about. Ava barely looked at the screen, her composure unwavering. But a subtle twitch in her eye betrayed her. She was re-evaluating, processing the new threat. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. "Does it even matter? You have been playing me from day one. Everything I sacrificed, everything I risked, it was all so you could get your payday and leave me to face the SEC. Was any of it real, or was I just the man with the access you needed?" Ava placed the tablet on a lab bench and turned to him, her expression softening into one of feigned sorrow. "Oh, Julian, you really are incapable of seeing the bigger picture, aren't you? Everything I did was to guarantee our future. The plan was always to build a fund and then vanish. To a place where we could be untouchable, together." "Together?" Julian let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You were carefully creating a trail that implicated my pregnant wife. You were going to let me burn so you could walk away clean. I was building a defense against her father, not a trap for you. There is a significant difference. Your wife's digital signature is on the wire authorizations. Your wife is the one the regulators will scrutinize. When this all comes down, she is the one who pays the price, and we walk away. And the crypto account? An insurance policy, just in case you lost your nerve." Ava moved toward him, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "But it doesn't have to end that way. We can still have everything. We can still live the life we always talked about." Julian just stared at her, a tempest of emotions warring across his face. Clara's team, listening in via the device they had planted, held their collective breath, wondering if his obsession would win out over his survival instinct. It did not. "I trusted you," he said, his voice completely hollow. "I blew up my marriage for you. I was ready to risk everything for you. And your plan was to strip me of everything and leave me for dead. Julian, please." "No." He stepped back toward the entrance of the lab. "I'm finished. Whatever happens from here on out, you are on your own." He walked out. Ava watched the empty doorway, her mask of control finally shattering to reveal the ice-cold fury simmering beneath. Julian went directly to the board of Helios Ventures. He confessed everything about the fraudulent research, the falsified data, the offshore crypto wallet, and about Ava Moreno and her documented history of defrauding tech investors. He painted himself as the ultimate victim, a man undone by a brilliant, ruthless con artist. The board listened intently, recorded his entire confession, and immediately contacted federal authorities. 2 days later, federal agents intercepted Ava Moreno at the Silicon Valley Innovation Summit, just as she was walking off stage after delivering the keynote address. They didn't find her preparing to flee, but rather absorbing the applause. They took her into custody in the main auditorium in front of 1,000 of her colleagues and the titans of the tech industry. The flash of a dozen cell phone cameras caught her off guard, the light bouncing off the glass walls of the boardroom. Within minutes, the images were trending. Serena Sterling, the titan of venture capital, her face a mask of cold fury as a process server handed her a thick legal summons. The story exploded across the tech blogs. Silicon Valley was in chaos. From the tranquility of her Presidio Heights mansion, Chloe watched the news unfold, her friend Maya, an investigative journalist, at her side. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a wave of calm washed over her. "It's finally done," she breathed. "Isn't it? The exposé is out there. Julian gave us everything. The SEC will tear her apart." Maya nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It certainly looks that way. They're buying the story that your foundation was her primary target. Our digital footprint proves it. The leaked emails, the offshore account transfers, routed through shell corporations. So, my name is clear? Your name is clear. Chloe exhaled a breath she'd been holding for a year. The suffocating pressure on her chest finally beginning to ease. Her eyes fell to the sonogram photo propped on her mantelpiece, a small, perfect shadow. I kept you safe, my little one, she whispered. It's all over now. But it was not all over. 2 days later, Chloe's phone buzzed. Maya's voice was tight with disbelief. The SEC has halted the investigation into Serena. What? The key witness, Julian's former analyst, he recanted his testimony. He claims he fabricated everything you gave the feds, all the documents. He says he was coerced. The digital files have been sealed by a court order, pending a review. A judge she has in her pocket ruled them inadmissible. That is impossible. How? I have no idea. But Serena walks. And, Chloe, that's not the worst of it. What could possibly be worse? She knows it was you. She knows you were the one who connected the dots and fed me the story. And she is not the kind of person who just lets something like that go. Chloe collapsed onto the sofa, the fragile piece she'd felt shattering into a million pieces. She's coming for me. She's coming for both of us. Whatever power she has, whatever leverage she can use, she's going to burn us to the ground. What are our options? We have to keep fighting. There are no other options. The first strike landed just hours later. Chloe was in a prenatal yoga class, trying to focus on the soft, steady beat of her baby's heart, when her phone vibrated with a news alert. A star journalist for the San Francisco Chronicle, Maya Singh, had been fired effective immediately for fabricating sources and journalistic malpractice. The article quoted an anonymous senior editor from her own paper. Chloe felt the warmth drain from her body. She's trying to destroy our only credible voice, she thought, her hands trembling. The yoga instructor knelt beside her. Mrs. Preston, are you okay? Your heart rate is suddenly very high. Never give up, he had begged her. See this through to the very end. But how could she do that now? The instructor's warnings about stress and its effect on the baby were ringing in her ears. Her best friend and star witness was now fighting a career-ending lawsuit, completely neutralized. Chloe felt cornered, the walls of the serene studio closing in on her. She was utterly alone, except she wasn't, not entirely. Her phone buzzed again, an incoming call from their corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling. Chloe steeled herself for another blow, and it came without delay. I have to formally withdraw as your foundation's counsel, Chloe. His voice was hollow, devoid of its usual confidence. What? No, Mr. Sterling. You've represented my family's ventures for 2 decades. Serena has me in a corner. A venture deal I structured years ago had some irregularities, things I thought were long buried. If I don't step away, she's threatened to leak the details to the Justice Department. She'll ruin my practice, my name, my entire family. Please, you promised you would help us navigate this. A long, heavy pause filled the line before the older man's voice returned, heavy with shame. I am so sorry, Chloe. I wish I had the nerve to take her on, but I don't. I have children, a reputation. I can't lose everything for this fight. I understand, Chloe said, though a cold rage was building inside her, a feeling of complete and utter betrayal. Thank you for all you've done. I hope she gets what's coming to her, Chloe, he said softly. I truly do. The call ended. Chloe sat on the yoga mat, the quiet hum of the studio's air conditioning filling the silence. Her friend was disgraced, her lawyer had abandoned her, and her enemy was walking free, more powerful than ever, and zeroing in on her. She had never felt so terrifyingly isolated. The room, with its calming blue walls and peaceful bamboo plants, suddenly felt like a cage. The inspirational posters about breathing and finding your center seemed like a cruel joke. Every part of her plan was in ruins. Serena was untouchable. Julian was now the sole focus of the SEC's investigation, his claims of being blackmailed now painted as a pathetic attempt to shift blame for his own greed. The terabytes of data they had compiled were now either legally sealed or ruled inadmissible. Every path forward was a dead end, and Serena was just getting started. The deliveries began that afternoon, sent by anonymous messenger services. Each one was a meticulously crafted piece of psychological torture. A funeral wreath made of wilted, expensive orchids. A beautifully crafted, artisan crib, but smashed into pieces. A mock business plan detailing the hostile takeover and dissolution of Chloe's charitable foundation. "Did you really think you could beat me?" A note read, "Your husband is a fool. Your allies are gone. Who's left to protect you? I will dismantle every good thing you have ever built. And I'll make sure you have a front row seat." Chloe instructed her staff to throw every package away unopened, refusing to give Serena the satisfaction of a reaction. She knew any sign of fear was a victory for her opponent, proof that the mind games were landing their mark. Chloe would not break. But later that evening, sitting by herself in the silent, unfinished nursery, she felt the first cracks of doubt appear. What was the use? She had risked everything, fought with all she had, and it had all been for nothing. Julian was finished, their family name was tarnished, and Serena was celebrating her victory. Every time she managed to stand up, she was knocked down with even more force. Maybe it was time to give up. Maybe it was time to disappear. She picked up the small, silver-framed sonogram picture, her finger tracing the delicate curve of her baby's profile. The strong, rhythmic heartbeat she had focused on in yoga class that morning felt like a distant memory. "I couldn't protect you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I tried so hard, but I wasn't strong enough." The sorrow finally broke through, a brutal, overwhelming tsunami of grief. She collapsed into the rocking chair, her body racked with deep, silent sobs, releasing all the terror and despair she had been bottling up for months. When the storm of tears finally passed, a hand came to rest on her shoulder. It was Julian. He looked exhausted, years older, but his eyes held a new resolve. He knelt down in front of her. "Your father called," he said softly. "He's creating a new private equity fund with his own capital. He said to tell you, the Prestons don't run, we pivot, and more delicate." But as Chloe walked into the hospital suite, his eyes were as piercing as they had ever been. "You look like you just survived a Category 5 hurricane," he said, his voice a bit raspy. Chloe managed a weak smile. "You have no idea." "Fair point," he conceded, motioning with a frail hand toward the chair next to his bed. "Sit down. Tell me what's been happening while I've been in here staring at the ceiling." Chloe sat, and the whole story poured out of her, discovering the affair, Julian's entanglement with Serena, her foundation's assets being frozen by the courts, the vicious media leaks, and the soul-crushing weight of it all. Robert listened intently, his face a stony mask. When she finally fell silent, the only sound was the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. "So, that's it?" he asked. "You're just going to roll over and let her win? I don't know what else I can do." "Yes, you do." Chloe looked up at him, her vision blurred by fresh tears. "You are a Preston," Robert said, his voice finding its old resonance. "You are not a victim. You are not helpless. And you are certainly not going to let some corporate sociopath tear down what our family has built. She's already won, Dad. She's destroyed everything. She has destroyed your first plan of attack." "That is all," he retorted, adjusting himself in the bed with a slight grimace. "When I was building my first company, we had a term for this, a blitzscaling attack. Your key partner has been turned, your capital is locked up, and your public image is being systematically torched. It feels like the end, I know. It's not. It is the beginning of the counteroffensive. Our initial strategy was reactive, he went on. We tried to beat her in the court of public opinion, with press statements and legal threats. That was our mistake. So now, we change the battlefield. What other battlefield is there? Robert's smile was thin and sharp, a ghost of the ruthless negotiator he'd been in his prime. Serena has a past, he said. She has run this exact playbook before on other companies, other founders. You have to find them. Predators like her leave a long trail of enemies, and enemies have excellent memories. Find the people she has ruined. Find out what they know. Find the proof she thinks she buried forever. But how? I wouldn't even know where to begin. You start by digging, he commanded. Scour old financial news archives, SEC filings from a decade ago, message boards for failed startups. Look for her signature moves. Serena has been playing this game for 15 years. She has left her fingerprints all over the valley. You just need to know what you're looking for. And if I find these other victims, what happens then? You do the one thing she would never anticipate, Robert said, his eyes gleaming. You unite them. You give them a platform. You give them a chance to reclaim their stories. You don't just fight her. You build an alliance. Chloe leaned back in her chair, her mind suddenly racing. An alliance. Serena's method was to isolate her targets, to pick off the founders who were over-leveraged and alone, with no one to watch their back. She took them down one by one in the dark, because she is certain they lack the strength to challenge her alone. But if they unite, Arthur concluded, you could finally possess the leverage needed to make her whole operation crumble. Charlotte let the possibility settle in her mind. It was an enormous risk. It was perilous. She had no assurance she would even locate anyone, let alone convince them to speak. Yet, it was a plan, a new way forward, a reason to keep going. I'll give it a shot, she murmured. No, Arthur corrected, shaking his head. You will triumph, because giving up isn't in our nature, not for you, and not for your baby. Charlotte gave a slow nod, then leaned over to kiss her father's forehead. You need to rest, she said. I've got some research to get into. For the following 72 hours, Charlotte was practically fused to her laptop. She scoured the digital archives of business journals and private equity announcements. She looked for recurring themes in abrupt corporate failures, patent infringement lawsuits, and hostile takeovers that resulted in financial devastation. She was hunting for entrepreneurs whose experiences mirrored what Serena was attempting to do to her own family. And gradually, bit by bit, she started to find them. A pharmaceutical company in Boston that collapsed in 2018. The founder was accused of fabricating clinical results based on a tip from an anonymous source. He lost everything. A financial tech company in Chicago, back in 2020, the partners were torn apart by allegations of embezzlement, which allowed Serena to swoop in and purchase their innovative software for almost nothing, a green energy firm in Seattle in 2022. It was the same playbook, the same devastating outcome. And hidden deep within old, encrypted forms and private chat logs, Charlotte discovered mentions of the very same investor, working through a maze of shell companies, Summit Equity, North Star Holdings, Titan Investments, 4 different corporate identities, 4 destroyed businesses, 1 predator. Charlotte compiled all of her findings into a heavily encrypted file, names, times, places, and scraps of evidence. Then she began to link them all together. A single name continued to surface across multiple cases, not as a casualty, but as a former risk analyst who had attempted to blow the whistle. A man named David Chen. Charlotte traced him to a small, unassuming accounting practice in Queens. She called his office number. It rang 3 times before a man picked up. Who's calling? David's tone was tense and wary. My name is Eleanor Vance. I think we know the same person. A woman who is now the head of Sterling Capital. I think you knew her when she was running a different company. A thick silence filled the line before a quiet, resentful voice answered, Apex Ventures. That's the name she was using when she ruined my life. I know, Eleanor said, her grip on the phone so tight. Her knuckles turned white. She's trying to do the exact same thing to my family's charitable foundation right now, and I was hoping you might be able to help me. There was another long silence. I kept everything, David finally said. Every single spreadsheet, every internal memo, every doctored financial statement. I always had a feeling this day would arrive. I knew someone else would eventually start searching for the truth. I'm heading your way now, Eleanor stated. Just tell me where. David provided the address, and for the first time, in what felt like an age, Charlotte felt a spark of something she had nearly forgotten. She felt a surge of hope. David Chen resided in a humble row house on a quiet, tree-lined block that seemed a world apart from the glittering skyscrapers of Manhattan's financial district. The house needed a new coat of paint. The small front yard was unkempt, and thick drapes blocked any view of the inside. Charlotte knocked. A few seconds later, the door cracked open. David appeared to be in his late 50s, though he looked older, his face marked by the deep lines of chronic stress, and his eyes holding a tired weight. You're Eleanor Vance, he stated. It wasn't a question. I am. Please come in. The interior of the house was packed from wall to wall. Every flat surface was covered with document boxes, metal filing cabinets, and massive stacks of binders. It felt less like a residence and more like the personal archives of a decade-long fixation. I've been anticipating this for a very long time, David said, guiding Charlotte through a tight walkway into a small living area, waiting for somebody else to discover who she really is, someone who could finally use what I've gathered. What is all of this? David gestured to the boxes that filled the room. Everything. Every crooked deal Serena ever put together. Every executive she paid off. Every false projection she ever approved. I dedicated 5 years to tracking her after she destroyed my career. I compiled it. I sorted it. I got it ready. Ready for what? For this, David said softly, grabbing a thick binder from a nearby pile and pushing it across a coffee table toward Eleanor. For someone who has the means to fight her. Eleanor opened the binder. It contained more than just financial documents. It was a complete manual of her tactics, filled with illegally taped phone calls, blackmail materials, and elaborate plans for corporate sabotage. Why didn't you ever bring this to the police? She asked. I tried. David's voice was sharp with old resentment. They were either too incompetent to act, or she already had someone working for her on the inside. Serena has a web of contacts, people in government agencies you would never suspect. Every time I thought I had a strong case, my evidence would just vanish. She painted me as some kind of unhinged, bitter ex-employee. So you just gave up? I survived, David corrected, his expression like steel. There is a profound difference. I exhausted my savings, and no one was willing to support me. But I held on to copies of everything, just waiting for a person with more influence, more resources, more of a motivation to take her down to show up. Eleanor thought of her family's nonprofit, her father's entire life's work, her baby on the way. I have a motivation, she said, her voice low but unwavering. Then take it, David insisted, nudging the binder closer to her. All of it. Use every bit of it, and make that monster pay for everything she's done. Eleanor used the next 48 hours to absorb the detailed record of Serena's corruption. The sheer scope of her deception was breathtaking. She had engineered the hostile acquisitions of at least 4 major rivals, that Eleanor could now prove, and probably many others. She had laundered millions of dollars through offshore accounts disguised as philanthropic organizations. She had created a trail of shattered careers and bankrupted visionaries that went back almost 10 years. And she had never faced any consequences for it. But this was a different situation. This time, Eleanor possessed something Serena had never accounted for. She had a cousin who was a leading investigative journalist for the New York Times. She had a board member who was a former federal judge. And she had an expanding roster of other founders who had been waiting for this very opportunity. Charlotte started making phone calls. Her first was to her cousin, Mark, the reporter. "I am aware your boss forced you to drop the Serena Sterling investigation," Charlotte said. "He did." Their legal team threatened a defamation suit that would have bankrupted the newspaper. Mark's voice was strained. "Charlotte, you don't understand the kind of pressure they can apply." "I'm starting to," Charlotte replied, her tone resolute. "And I'm not asking you to go to print. Not right away. I am just asking for your assistance, completely off the books. No credit, no attributable sources." There was a brief silence. "What exactly are you building?" "I intend to take apart Serena Sterling's entire operation the same way she tried to take apart my family's," she explained. By constructing a case so airtight, Clara brushed her fingers over the silhouette of a hand-stenciled bird on the nursery wall, a gentle smile on her face. At 7 months pregnant, her universe had condensed into this one flawless room, a haven of soft grays and muted creams with a view of Chicago's vast Lake Michigan. Her husband, Marcus, was the celebrated architect of their perfect life. A magnate in the ruthless sphere of luxury real estate, he provided a level of security that felt impenetrable. "It's the newest prototype," he had explained, nodding toward the minimalist black boxes that had been delivered that morning. A fully integrated home command center. Biometric access, adaptive environmental controls, everything. Only the finest for you and our little one. She had smiled, kissing his cheek. The finest is your specialty. Marcus was a man who operated at the forefront of smart architecture, and he insisted their penthouse and their family be a showcase of that vision. Now, standing amidst boxes of nursery furniture, Clara decided to set up the new digital art frame, a gift from him. The setup guide was brief, designed for someone technically fluent. It requested a primary cloud account to sync with for displaying images. She entered Marcus's main business email, the one he used for his development projects, assuming it would have the necessary administrative privileges. A soft chime confirmed the connection. She started folding tiny blankets into a drawer while the system quietly pulled data in the background. A few moments later, her own tablet, now connected to the new home network, chimed with an alert. It wasn't a message or an email. It was a calendar notification. "Closing celebration, Alinea, 8 p.m. Clara felt a knot of confusion. Their own 10th anniversary was still months away. She tapped the event, assuming it was a glitch. A different calendar appeared, layered over their shared family one. This one was private, labeled with only 2 initials. The event was for AR. A sharp, cold pain shot through her chest. Who was HR? Her curiosity curdled into a sickening certainty. She began checking the other newly synced services on her tablet. One was a real-time vehicle locator, part of the upgraded security package. Marcus was supposedly in Boston for a 2-day investor meeting, but the service showed his Range Rover hadn't been to the airport at all. It had been parked for the last 17 hours in a private garage in Lincoln Park, just blocks from Alinea, the same restaurant from the calendar notification. The facts assembled themselves with brutal, undeniable clarity. The receipt was a map to a hidden life. A custom-engraved Patek Philippe, a corporate gift, he'd said. But the warranty card, tucked away in his desk, told a different story. For SL, always. It corresponded perfectly with his solo investment trip to Geneva. For months, he had been living a carefully constructed deception. Every lie was a brick in the foundation of the perfect world he'd designed for her, and now it was all turning to dust. The very meticulousness she once admired had just become the architect of their ruin. When Arthur walked into their Beacon Hill penthouse that evening, smelling of expensive cologne instead of stale office air, he found her in the future nursery. He was glowing, setting his leather satchel by the door. "The Seaport deal is ours," he declared, moving to embrace her. "We just added another 50 floors to the skyline." Eleanor didn't turn. She just stared at him, her face a mask of calm. "How was the board meeting?" she asked, her voice chillingly quiet. "Grueling," he lied with practiced ease. "But we got it done. I couldn't stop thinking about you two." "That's odd," Eleanor said, her voice a fragile whisper, "because according to the jeweler in Geneva, you weren't in a meeting at all." She turned the small, velvet-lined box in her hands to face him. Inside, nestled on the satin, was a second warranty card. They were so helpful. They confirmed the purchase date and even the custom engraving. Arthur's confident smile faltered. The color drained from his face as he stared at the damning piece of paper, his well-rehearsed excuses failing him for the first time. That's a mistake," he stammered, reaching for the box. "A clerical error, Eleanor, that's all." "Is this an error too?" She swiped open her tablet, showing him the wire transfer from a bank account she didn't recognize. The recipient was Patek Philippe. The amount matched the watch exactly. She looked him straight in the eye. "You expensed one watch to the company, Arthur. So tell me, who is SL?" The initials hung in the air of the baby's room, an accusation he could not deny. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The real estate titan, the man who could sell dreams to an entire city, was utterly bankrupt. "Your real estate empire is on the verge of collapse. Your lenders are pulling out. What leverage could you possibly have over me?" Charles reached into his briefcase and retrieved a slim portfolio. He slid it gently across the mahogany desk. "Thomas Adler," Charles said calmly. "The South Boston redevelopment, 2016. The structural reports you buried to get the permits." Arthur's smug expression tightened. "Camilla Reyes. The North End project, 2019. The zoning variances you secured with backroom promises." The smirk vanished completely. "The Chen family. Chinatown, 2021. The historical building you had delisted through political favors." Charles leaned forward, his voice like ice. "I have it all. Every shortcut, every handshake deal, every life you disregarded for a skyline view." For the first time, Arthur's polished composure fractured. Charles saw a glint of pure panic in his eyes. "I found Adler's chief engineer," Charles continued. "Remember him? The one you blacklisted after he refused to sign off on the faulty foundation. The one you assumed was too scared to ever speak up." "Whatever he told you," Arthur hissed, his voice a low growl, "is hearsay. It's ancient history. A disgruntled employee's lies. It will never stand." "That's where you're mistaken," Charles countered. "Adler kept his own set of blueprints, hand-marked, dated, with memos detailing every single concern. Things that can't be bulldozed and forgotten." Arthur stood alone in the nursery, surrounded by the blueprints of a future that was now condemned. Motion-activated sconces cast a soft light on the hand-crafted crib. A digital photo frame, on the bookshelf, synced to their cloud, displayed an image of him and Eleanor on their wedding day. A smiling, hopeful ghost from a life that no longer existed. He hadn't been exposed by a rival developer or a nosy journalist, but by his own arrogance, the obsession with detail he was so proud to master. The irony was crushing. He'd built his career on foundations of steel and stone, promising security and legacy. Now his own duplicity had been laid bare with brutal precision, demolishing the only legacy that ever mattered. He looked around the room, at the imported Italian furniture, the state-of-the-art air filtration system, the bespoke watch that had been his undoing. It was a gilded cage of his own design. 2 weeks later, Eleanor met her brother for lunch on Newbury Street. The city bustled outside, a universe away from the suffocating quiet of her penthouse. "The first round of divorce negotiations is done," Eleanor said, adding sugar to her iced tea. His opening offer was a joke. He tried to pass off the affair as a moment of weakness brought on by the stress of the new baby. Her brother snorted into his napkin. "He's lucky you didn't send copies of those bank statements to the Globe." "I considered it," Eleanor admitted with a faint, tired smile. "But I don't have to. The evidence is financial, contractual, and irrefutable. My attorney calls it a textbook case of premeditated infidelity with clear financial malfeasance." She took a long sip of her tea. He built a perfect lie, and it left a perfect paper trail. It recorded the truth he was trying to bury. As she looked out at the street, she rested a hand on her stomach, feeling the soft flutter of new life. The empire Arthur had built was in ruins, but she was still here. She and her son would design their own future now. That night, back in the cavernous penthouse, Eleanor walked into Arthur's home office. As she stepped inside, the automated system he'd installed, sensing her presence, brought the track lighting up to a soft glow. A screen on the wall flickered to life, showing the real-time stock market ticker. For a second, her heart seized. The technology was a constant, humming ghost of the life they'd shared. Then she drew a steady breath, walked over to the mahogany desk, and with a few deliberate clicks, began downloading files, new folders, a new hard drive, a new life all her own. The city council hearing was broadcast on every local news channel. Reporters, angry union workers, and curious Bostonians filled the public gallery. Eleanor sat in the front row, her face serene as the council president read the final verdict. The Thorn Tower project was officially rejected, citing zoning fraud and ethical misconduct. Arthur was led out by his lawyers, a ghost in a $1,000 suit. His confidence and charm were gone, replaced by a hollow stare. As his team hurried him away, Eleanor caught his eye. She offered no pity, no sign of triumph. She simply held his gaze, a silent witness, until he finally looked away. He would have a lifetime to reflect on the empire he had burned to the ground. He would remember the night he presented her with a lie in a velvet box, the woman carrying his son, while he was flying across the world to give the real thing to his mistress. That was Eleanor's victory. That was her justice. Her father, Charles, waited until the Thorn Tower deal was officially dead before he made his final move. His first stop was the Back Bay residence of Silas Croft, Arthur's political rainmaker. The lobbyist answered the door himself, looking significantly grayer than Charles remembered. The professional blowback had been immediate and unforgiving after the zoning fraud went public. Silas had been asked to resign from 2 major boards and had become persona non grata in the very circles he once controlled. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice paper-thin, "I doubt we have anything to talk about." "Oh, I believe we do." Charles stepped into the marble foyer, uninvited. "You were aware of Arthur's shell corporations. You helped him navigate the loopholes. When your own contacts on the Planning Commission raised concerns, you had them silenced. A lobbyist's job is to influence. A public servant's duty is to serve the public. You corrupted both." Charles placed a tablet on an antique console table. This is the advance copy of a feature for the Boston Sunday magazine. It lays out, in meticulous detail, how the powerful Silas Croft enabled a fraud. You actively ignored his crimes and conspired to derail the careers of those who questioned him. "You can't publish this," Silas whispered, his face ashen. "It's already been sent. I also took the liberty of endowing a new chair for civic ethics at Harvard's Kennedy School. As it happens, their first major research paper is a case study on the link between real estate development and political corruption. Your name features rather prominently." Silas stared, looking as if the floor had dissolved beneath his feet. "You taught Arthur that rules were for other people," Charles stated. "Now you get to learn what happens when the truth is the only rule that matters." He left without looking back. Silas Croft put his condo on the market by the end of the week. He moved to a state where his name meant nothing. The second visit was to Arthur. Charles found him at his now empty office, coordinating the liquidation of his assets. He sat in a visitor's chair, studying the hollowed-out man who had once thought he owned the city's sky. "If you're here to gloat," Arthur began, his voice flat, "I'm here so you understand one thing." Charles leaned forward, his tone quiet and sharp. The last thing Eleanor felt before her world fell apart was the joy of carrying your son. She was dreaming of your shared future while you were engraving a watch for another woman, all while she was collapsing, while paramedics fought to stabilize her, pleading for her to hang on. "I didn't know the trial drug was a placebo," Julian argued. "You didn't care. That's so much worse. You saw Clara's incoming calls. You saw her string of desperate messages. You knew something was terribly wrong, and you switched your phone to silent so you could finish dinner with your partner in crime." A film of tears glossed Julian's eyes, the only genuine feeling Robert had ever witnessed from him. "Your tech empire is dismantled," Robert continued. "Your assets are frozen. Your corporate fixer is disbarred. Your freedom is gone for the next 15 years. He stood up from the table, adjusting his tie. "But here is the judgment you'll carry for the rest of your days. Every single time you close your eyes, you will see her fall. You will hear her panicked voice messages, and you will understand, with chilling certainty, that you could have answered, but you chose to be with her instead." Robert pivoted and headed for the exit. Julian was now sobbing, broken guttural noises echoing in the sterile room. "Live with that," Robert said, without a backward glance. "Forever." The door clicked shut. His final stop was Simone. She'd been transferred to a federal correctional facility after her conviction. 22 years, with charges including corporate fraud and reckless endangerment. No chance of early release. She would become an old woman and die behind bars. Clara's brother, Ethan, sat opposite her in the visiting room, observing her pathetic attempt to maintain an air of control. She wore a drab, standard-issue jumpsuit, her power suits a forgotten dream, her styled hair now limp and uncared for. The mask was completely gone. "You believe you've won," she scoffed. "I know I have. I have decades of experience. I have connections. You have a cot and 3 meals a day." Ethan pushed a slim data drive across the table. "Every executive you ever blackmailed has just received an encrypted file detailing your entire history of corporate espionage. Every contact who thought you were an ally has been given definitive proof of your betrayals. Every secret server or offshore crypto wallet you thought you had has been erased and sealed. There must be another way," Simone murmured, her voice thin with desperation. "There isn't." Ethan rose to his feet. "You targeted my family because you saw our father as just a retired judge. You saw my sister as an acceptable risk for a billion-dollar merger." He leaned in, his voice a low, sharp warning. "You made a catastrophic error. I'm the guy who spent a year mapping your entire web of corruption, and my focus is relentless." He turned to leave. Enjoy your next 22 years. Miss Vasseur, I will personally see to it that every one of them is as lonely as you made my sister feel when she collapsed." He left her there as the realization dawned that there was no backup plan, no one left to bribe, no way out. There was only the price for what she had done. 2 months later, Clara was in a doctor's office, staring at the physician who had just given her yet another piece of life-changing news. "Congratulations," the doctor said, smiling warmly. "You're pregnant. By my estimate, you're about 10 weeks along." Clara's hand instinctively went to her stomach. A tidal wave of shock hit her first, followed by disbelief, and then a creeping sense of clarity that stole her breath. 10 weeks. That would mean it was before the collapse. "Yes," the doctor confirmed gently. "You conceived before that terrible incident took place." Clara was caught in a silent hurricane of emotions. A child. A new life had been growing inside of her, while her old one was falling to pieces. It was a piece of a future she never imagined. She did the math in her head. It was possible. The last time she and Julian had been together, before the lies became public, before that night, before she knew the whole awful truth, this baby was a real, living link to the life she thought she had lost forever. "Is everything okay?" the doctor inquired, seeing the look on her face. "You seem a bit stunned." "I am," Clara confessed, a watery laugh escaping her lips. "I just never expected this. I understand your circumstances have been profoundly challenging. If you need to discuss your options—" "No," Clara interrupted, shaking her head with a sudden powerful resolve. "I want this baby, more than anything I have ever wanted." The doctor's smile grew wider. "In that case, we are going to give you the very best care possible." Clara drove to her father's house in a daze. Robert was in his library, methodically arranging his collection of legal texts. His world was slowly regaining its quiet order. He saw her expression and set his book down at once. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Clara told him everything. When she finished, Robert was silent for what felt like an hour. Then, his stern features melted into a look she hadn't seen since she was a child. "A grandchild," he said softly. "A new start." "Yes." He pulled her into a hug, holding her with the same strength he used to when she was small and scraped her knee, certain her father could fix any problem in the world. "This is a gift, Clara," he whispered into her hair. "After all the betrayal, all the hurt, this is a true gift. I know." She leaned her head against his chest. "I'm going to name her Hope." Hope, because that's exactly what she is. A light that showed up in the absolute darkest period of my life. A reason to keep going. 5 months later, Clara stood at the opening ceremony for the Northlight Foundation for Medical Ethics. It was a stunning modern building overlooking Seattle's waterfront, funded by the assets seized from Julian and Simone's fraudulent enterprise. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of Puget Sound and the Olympic Mountains. At the center of the lobby was a simple plaque dedicated to whistleblowers. Clara rested a hand on her prominent baby bump as she read the inscription aloud. "For those who speak, truth to power." The bravest people I have ever had the privilege to know. Robert stood beside her, his posture straight, his spirit renewed. Ethan was there as well. His silent battle finally won. Their closest family friend, Thomas, had also come to witness the beautiful new chapter that had emerged from the wreckage. 4 people bonded into a new kind of family by betrayal and survival. "You are going to have such a wonderful view of the world, little one," Clara whispered to her belly. "I'm naming you Hope because you are the beacon that led me out of the storm." "He would be so incredibly proud of you," Robert said. His voice was heavy with unshed tears. "You never surrendered. I couldn't. I owed it to myself." Ethan wrapped a comforting arm around her. And now you get a fresh start. Clara nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Yes, but it's different this time. Different how? Before, my life was about rebuilding for someone else. For Julian. For the perfect marriage I thought I was supposed to have. For the future I was told I should want. She gazed across the foundation lobby, at her father, her brother, and the friend who had been her anchor. This time, I'm rebuilding for me. And for the child who showed me how to survive. The one I had to say goodbye to, and the one who is on her way. The foundation launch had ended hours ago, but Clara stayed behind. She sat on a private balcony overlooking Elliott Bay, watching the ferries glide across the water like silent ghosts in the twilight. Her father had gone home to rest. Ethan had returned to his own quiet life. Thomas had begun the drive back to his winery. A deep sense of peace now settled in his features. She was finally by herself, and for the first time in ages, her thoughts were still. She considered the past year, the corporate, takedown, Julian, and Simone, on all she had forfeited, and all that was now taking hold. People say time mends every wound, she thought, but that's not quite right. Time just blurs the edges. The mending is a decision you make anew each morning. Her palms settled on the soft swell of her stomach, a small, sheltered promise of the future. I lost my son, she murmured to the sprawling Seattle lights, to the sinking sun, to Leo's memory. I lost a decade of my life. I lost myself in a partnership that was an architectural masterpiece of a lie. But from that demolition, I found her again, the woman I was always supposed to be. She moved toward the railing of the unfinished balcony, stopping beside the raw steel frame where a Foucault pendulum, a tribute to Leo, would soon be installed. My father, the litigator, always said justice isn't about getting even. It's about restoring equilibrium. It's ensuring that the people who shatter things don't get the chance to do it again. She brushed her fingers over the cool, unfinished concrete. Julian will have 15 years to contemplate his choices from a federal facility. Isabel will spend her future trying to claw back a reputation that is now toxic in every venture capital circle. And I have the opportunity to build something true. She glanced at the sky, where the first downtown lights were igniting like nascent stars. But this time, I'm not designing my life to fit someone else's blueprint. I'm designing it for me and for the two children who gave me the title of mother, the one I hold in my past and the one I hold now. She turned toward the elevator, toward her home, toward her future. She stopped for a moment, however, taking one last look at the view. I'll miss you, she whispered to the dream she let go of. Always. A Seahawk, catching an updraft, soared high above the building, its wingtips catching the last golden rays of the sun. It hovered for a second, a perfect symbol of freedom, before gliding out over the city. Clara watched it disappear. Then, with a serene smile, she placed a hand on her stomach and stepped forward into the life that was waiting. 4 months later, on a crisp, sunny morning in November, Willa Rose Vance was born. She had her mother's focused eyes and her brother's quiet intensity. She was resilient, she was flawless, she was a wonder. Clara cradled her daughter in the hushed calm of the delivery room, encircled by her trusted few. Her brother Marcus occupied the chair near the window, his usual composure dissolved into silent, happy tears. Maya, her closest friend, was already mocking up ideas for a sensory-friendly mural on her laptop. "Welcome to this world, little architect," Clara whispered. "Your big brother is watching over you from the constellations." The infant stirred, nestling more deeply into her mother's embrace. And Clara Vance, who had seen her perfectly designed world collapse into rubble, finally understood the feeling of being genuinely wealthy. 1 year later, Clara stood at the entrance of the Leo project, watching families and architectural students pass through the doors. She had repurposed her agony into a cause. The organization provided grants and pro bono design services for families needing to build or retrofit homes for medically fragile children. Over 50 families had been given a new beginning there in the last year. Mentorship, resource navigation, design expertise, a community. From a catastrophic betrayal, something resilient and beautiful had been constructed. Clara balanced Willa on her hip, motioning toward the skyline, visible through the project's floor-to-ceiling windows. "See that tall, pointed building?" Clara said. "That's where we make sure your big brother's memory builds something amazing. He was the most brilliant mind I've ever known," Willa cooed, pointing a chubby finger at a fairy gliding across the sound. Clara chuckled, planting a kiss on her daughter's head. She thought of Julian, his celebrated tech empire broken up and auctioned for assets, his genius now limited to coding for the prison's library system. She thought of Isabel, now a remote consultant for an obscure app developer, a faint echo of the powerful investor she had been. She thought of her father, now retired, who devoted his days to spoiling his granddaughter and chairing the project's board. She thought of Leo, of his inquisitive gaze, of the way he'd hum with focus while building intricate cities from magnetic tiles. "You made us all more resilient, my amazing boy," she whispered. "Not in the way I begged the universe for, but in a way that truly endures. You are the foundation of this place now, a place that shelters other families with big challenges, a legacy of compassion." A young mother approached Clara, her expression a mix of desperate hope and exhaustion. It was the same look Clara remembered seeing in her own reflection. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "Are you Clara Vance? I was told you might be able to help. My contractor, he ran off with our insurance money, the entire fund for our son's accessibility modifications. We have nothing left." Clara gave her a warm, empathetic smile. "Come on in," she said. "Let me tell you a story. It's about a very special boy who taught me that a true home is built from the heart, and that is always worth fighting for." And as she guided the young mother into the offices, Clara finally grasped the truth. Sorrow never fully vanishes, but it can be redesigned into strength. The pain doesn't leave, but it can be assigned a new purpose. And a mother's love never, ever fades. It just finds a new way to rebuild the world.